My name is Elena. I am 34 years old. To my family, I am a stain on their pristine, high-gloss reputation. My brother, Julian, is a top-tier real estate broker who wears $3,000 suits and smiles for billboards. My parents are social climbers who measure success by how clean your fingernails are. Me? My fingernails are permanently stained with clay, lime, and stone dust. They call me a manual laborer. They tell their friends I lay bricks for a living because I couldn't cut it in the corporate world. They are ashamed of me. What they don't know, because they have never once asked about my work, is that I am not just a mason. I am a heritage conservation architect. I am one of only 5 people in the world certified by UNESCO to restore specific structural failures in 18th century masonry. I don't build garden walls. I save cathedrals from collapsing. But to Julian, I am just cheap labor he calls when he needs a hole patched up fast. Yesterday, the call came at 6 a.m. Julian was screaming into the phone. He was about to close the biggest deal of his career, the sale of the Blackwood Manor, a crumbling 19th century estate that he had slapped a coat of paint on and listed for $25 million. Elena, get over here, he barked. The antique marble fireplace in the drawing room just developed a hairline crack. The buyer is flying in from Italy in 3 hours. If he sees that crack, he walks. Fix it. I'll give you $50 and you can take the leftover sandwiches. I should have said no. I knew Julian had been cutting corners on this renovation. I knew he had been using modern cement on historic stone, which is a death sentence for old buildings. But I loved Blackwood Manor. It was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, and the thought of Julian's cheap contractors ruining that fireplace made my stomach turn. So I put on my coveralls, grabbed my specialized kit, trowels, syringes, and a jar of my proprietary lime and volcanic ash mortar, and drove over. When I arrived, the house smelled of fresh paint and desperation. Julian was pacing the foyer, spraying expensive cologne into the air to mask the scent of damp rot he hadn't bothered to fix properly. Finally, he sneered, looking at my work boots. Try not to track mud on the staging rug. The fireplace is in there. You have 45 minutes, and for God's sake, stay out of sight when he gets here. You look like a homeless person. I ignored him. I went to the fireplace. It was worse than a crack. It was a stress fracture caused by Julian using the wrong load-bearing beam in the basement. I couldn't fix the beam in an hour, but I could stabilize the marble using a technique called invisibile, a method I had perfected during a restoration project in Florence. I was on my knees, injecting the binding agent with a syringe, completely focused, when I heard the heavy oak doors open behind me. I checked my watch. I had only been working for 20 minutes. The buyer was early. "Mr. Rossi!" Julian's voice switched instantly to a sycophantic purr. "Welcome, welcome! We weren't expecting you for another hour, but what a pleasure. Please come in. Ignore the noise, we are just polishing the final details." I tried to pack up quickly, but I was cornered. I stood up, wiping my dusty hands on my rag, holding a trowel. Mr. Rossi walked into the room. He was an older man, impeccably dressed in a linen suit, with eyes that scanned the room like a hawk. He wasn't looking at the staging furniture. He was looking at the bones of the house. His eyes landed on me, or rather, on the fireplace behind me. Julian rushed forward, stepping between me and Mr. Rossi, flashing a nervous, shark-like smile. "Apologies, Mr. Rossi," Julian laughed, waving a hand at me dismissively. "This is just the help. Actually, embarrassing as it is, this is my sister, Elena. She's the family failure. We let her do the grunt work and patch up the holes so she can feel useful. She was just leaving." My parents, who had arrived to support Julian's big sale, were standing in the doorway. My mother let out a mortified sigh. My father chuckled awkwardly. "Yes, Elena, go clean up. You're getting dust everywhere." The humiliation was a physical blow. Family failure, grunt work. I tightened my grip on the trowel. I was about to walk away, to disappear like I always did. But Mr. Rossi didn't laugh. He didn't look at Julian, he didn't look at the view. He stepped around my brother, walking straight toward me. He looked at my dirty coveralls. Then he looked at the syringe in my hand. Finally, he leaned in close to the fireplace, examining the hairline fracture I had just filled. The room went dead silent. Julian's smirk faltered. "You are using a lime putty base," Mr. Rossi said, his voice low and raspy. He reached out and touched the wet mortar. "And, is that volcanic ash? Pozzolana?" He turned to look at me, his eyes wide. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "It allows the marble to breathe. If you use epoxy or cement, the stone will reject it and shatter within a year. This blend bonds at the molecular level. It is the Roman method." Mr. Rossi froze. He looked at my face, then back at the work. A look of absolute recognition washed over him. He straightened up, buttoned his jacket, and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "I have been looking for the person who knew this technique for 5 years," he said softly. Then he turned to Julian, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "You introduced her as a failure?" Julian blinked, confused. She's just a mason. She messes around with rocks." "A mason?" Mr. Rossi laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You idiot!" He turned his back on Julian and extended a hand to me, ignoring the dust on my palms. "Maestra Elena," he said, using the Italian title for a master of the arts. "My name is Alessandro Rossi. I am the chairman of the Venetian Heritage Trust. We have read your papers on structural Gothic stabilization. I am not here to buy this house from your brother. I came to America specifically to find you." Julian dropped his clipboard. Julian looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. He stuttered, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "Maestra? Mr. Rossi, I think there is a language barrier. Elena mixes cement. She fixes driveways." "She is a surgeon of stone," Mr. Rossi corrected, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And you are a butcher." He turned back to me, his demeanor softening into deference. "Maestra Elena, I was prepared to pay $25 million for this estate based on your brother's brochure. He claims it is a museum-quality restoration, but seeing as the expert is in the room, would you do me the honor of a walkthrough? I want to know what lies beneath the paint." My mother gasped. "Mr. Rossi, surely that isn't necessary. Julian has had the best inspectors sign off on this." "Inspectors can be bought, madam," Rossi said without looking at her. "True expertise cannot." He looked at me. "Well, Elena?" I looked at Julian. He was sweating now, his eyes pleading with me to play along, to be the quiet, submissive sister one last time. "I would be happy to," I said. I didn't take off my coveralls. I didn't wash my hands. I walked through the grand foyer, not as a guest, but as an auditor. I walked to the main support wall in the hallway. It was painted a pristine, trendy gray. I took out my small-sounding hammer, a tool I used to test density. Tap, tap, thud. The sound was dull, hollow. "Do you hear that?" I asked Mr. Rossi. "It sounds dead," he replied. "Exactly," I said. "This is a Victorian structure built with soft clay bricks. It needs to breathe. Julian has coated it in waterproof latex paint." I pulled out a small scraping tool and peeled back a tiny corner of the paint near the baseboard. Beneath the gray surface, the plaster was crumbling like wet chalk. Black spots bloomed on the brick underneath. "The moisture is trapped inside the wall," I explained. "Because he used the wrong paint, the house is literally rotting from the inside out. In 5 years, this wall will lose structural integrity." Julian rushed forward. That is just a minor cosmetic issue. We can touch that up." "It is structural cancer," I said calmly. I moved to the basement door. Julian physically blocked my path. "Elena," he hissed, his voice low so Rossi couldn't hear. "Can I talk to you? In the kitchen? Now." I looked at Rossi. "1 moment, please." I followed Julian into the kitchen. My parents were already there, looking terrified. "What are you doing?" Julian screamed the moment the door swung shut. "You are tanking the deal. Do you know how much commission is on the line? 1.5 million. I need this, Elena. I owe money to people who don't send overdue notices. I need this to close." "You used cement mortar on 19th century brick," I said. "You know that causes spalling. You are destroying the house to flip it for a profit." "Who cares about the bricks?" my father shouted. "Your brother is in trouble. Just go out there and tell the Italian that it's fine. Tell him it's rustic charm. You are ruining his future." "He ruined his own future when he decided to be a fraud," I said. "And you ruined our relationship when you introduced me as a failure." "We didn't mean it like that," my mother cried, grabbing my arm. We wanted you to look humble. Please, Elena. Family sticks together." I looked at their hands clutching me. Hands that had never applauded my degrees, never held my awards, never supported me when I was studying 18 hours a day. "Family sticks together?" I laughed. "You just told a billionaire I was the help. You don't want a sister, you want an accomplice." I pulled my arm free. "I have a professional obligation to the truth," I said. "And Mr. Rossi is waiting." I walked back out. Julian chased me, looking like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Rossi," I said, standing in the center of the drawing room, "my assessment is complete." The room went silent. "This house is not a restoration," I declared, my voice ringing off the high ceilings. "It is a cover-up. The masonry is suffocating. The load-bearing beams in the cellar, which I can smell from here, are likely compromised by dry rot that has been painted over. The restoration work has been done with modern materials that are incompatible with the historic fabric." I looked straight at Julian. "If you buy this house, Mr. Rossi, you aren't buying a mansion. You are buying a demolition project. The damage Julian has caused is irreversible. The value of this property is the land minus the cost of tearing it down." Mr. Rossi nodded slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked vindicated. He turned to Julian. "I think we are done here," Rossi said. "And frankly, I should report you to the licensing board for failure to disclose material defects. This is not salesmanship, young man. This is fraud." Julian slumped against the wall, the color draining from his face. My parents stood in the doorway, mouths open, watching their golden boy dissolve into a puddle of incompetence. Mr. Rossi turned his back on them and offered me his arm. "Maestra Elena," he said warmly, "my car is outside. I have a castle in Tuscany that was damaged by an earthquake in the 17th century. The foundation needs the invisible technique. I was going to offer the contract to a firm in London, but I think I just found the only person I trust." "I would be interested to hear more," I said. "The project budget is 5 million euros, he said casually as we walked toward the door. "And of course, full creative control." As we walked past Julian, I stopped. I reached into the pocket of my dirty coveralls and pulled out the $50 bill he had promised me earlier. I tucked it into the breast pocket of his $3,000 suit. "Here," I said, "for the sandwiches." I walked out of Blackwood Manor and into the back of a Rolls-Royce. As we drove away, I saw my parents arguing with Julian on the front lawn, but I couldn't hear them. The soundproofing was excellent. 3 months later, I was standing on scaffolding 50 feet in the air, overlooking the rolling hills of Tuscany. The air smelled of cypress trees and ancient stone. Below me, a team of 20 masons waited for my signal. I wasn't wearing coveralls anymore. I was wearing a linen shirt and holding a laser-calibrated structural scanner. "Maestra," one of the older Italian stonemasons called up to me, "the archway is stabilized. We are ready for the gold leaf?" "Proceed," I said. Mr. Rossi was true to his word. The restoration of the Castello de' Rossi was the project of a lifetime. But more importantly, for the first time in my life, I was being paid what I was worth. My fee for the initial consultation alone was more than Julian had made in his last 3 years of real estate combined. Speaking of Julian, news travels fast, even across the Atlantic. A week after I left Blackwood Manor, the local real estate board opened an investigation into Julian's firm. Mr. Rossi hadn't just walked away, he had filed a formal complaint regarding misrepresentation of structural safety. That triggered an audit of Julian's previous sales. It turned out Blackwood Manor wasn't the only house he had patched up with cheap glue and lies. There were lawsuits, class action lawsuits. I checked my phone during my lunch break. There was a voicemail from my mother. It was the 10th one this week. Elena, please pick up. They are taking the house. Julian's assets are frozen. He needs a lawyer. A good one. We know you are working for that billionaire now. Surely you can advance him alone. He is your brother. He made a mistake. You can't let him go to prison. I didn't delete the message. I saved it. It was a reminder of who they were. They didn't call to ask how I was. They didn't call to congratulate me on the UNESCO citation I had just received. They called because the ATM had walked away, and they wanted it back. I tapped the block button. It was the most structurally sound decision I had ever made. I later learned that Julian lost his broker's license permanently. The dangerous people he owed money to didn't wait for the courts. They repossessed his car and his condo. He is currently working as a night manager at a motel off the interstate. My parents had to downsize to a small apartment. Their reputation in the social club shattered. They spend their days telling anyone who will listen that their daughter abandoned them, that I am ungrateful. Let them talk. I climbed down from the scaffolding and walked through the great hall of the castle. Mr. Rossi was standing there, admiring the fireplace I had just finished restoring. I used the kintsugi philosophy, filling the cracks with gold resin to highlight the history rather than hiding it. It is beautiful, Elena, Rossi said. You took something broken and made it stronger. That is the job, I smiled. You know, he said thoughtfully, your brother tried to cover the cracks with paint. He wanted the world to think the house was perfect. You admit the damage and you turn it into art. That is why you are the master. And he is, well, he is history. I looked at the golden veins running through the marble. My family had spent my whole life trying to paint over me, to hide me, to make me look like something I wasn't. They thought I was the crack in their perfect facade. They didn't realize that without me, the whole house would fall down. And when it finally did, I wasn't there to catch it. I was busy building my own castle. Please note that this is a fictional story collected and edited by us for entertainment and educational purposes, aiming to promote emotional awareness, empathy, and understanding. It is absolutely not intended to spread hatred, offend, or cause harm. The story of Elena teaches us that true value isn't found in a suit or a job title, but in skill, integrity, and authenticity. It reminds us that family is not a free pass to exploit or demean someone. When you treat people like the help, don't be surprised when they stop helping. Now I want to ask you, if you were Elena, would you have sent money to help your brother avoid prison, even after how he treated you? Or is blocking their number the ultimate act of self-respect? Do you think the parents share equal blame for Julian's downfall? Leave your opinion in the comments below so we can discuss it together. Remember to like and subscribe to Revenge Rain to catch more compelling stories. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.